The stranger left wet footprints where rain had not reached. Matthew Truella gripped the cold edge of the choir stall as a woman in green silk entered Zennor Church. Rain tapped the slate roof, and the air smelled of wet wool and sea salt. She did not look at the altar or the villagers. She looked only at him. Father Anselm had raised his hand for the psalm. Matthew opened his mouth, but his first note shook. The stranger's dark hair lay loose beneath a hood trimmed with small silver beads. Each bead caught the candlelight like a drop of water. Matthew had sung in that church since he was a boy. Fishermen stopped mending nets to hear him at feast days. Old women pressed warm bread into his hands after services. Yet no praise had ever made him feel as exposed as that woman's fixed, patient attention. When the psalm ended, she left before the final blessing. A line of wet marks darkened the flagstones behind her. Matthew stepped from the choir stall, but his sister Elowen caught his sleeve. "Do not follow," she whispered. He looked at the open church door, where gray rain crossed the threshold. "Who is she?" Elowen did not answer. Outside, the church bell gave one dull swing in the wind, though no hand pulled its rope. The woman beneath the west window the next Sunday, the woman returned. She listened as though the song belonged to her already. She sat beneath the west window, where a saint in faded red glass held a lantern over painted waves. No one had seen her arrive. No pony stood tied near the churchyard wall. No cart waited on the lane. Matthew tried to keep his eyes on Father Anselm's book. Still, he felt her listening. Her gaze did not press upon him like a judge's gaze. It drew each note from his chest, then held it in the quiet space beneath the roof beams. He sang the old Cornish hymn his mother had loved. The tune rose slowly, as if it climbed the path from the cove. When he reached the final line, the stranger's lips moved with the words. Matthew lost the next breath. After the service, villagers gathered under the church porch. They shook rain from cloaks and spoke of damaged lobster pots. Matthew searched the lane, but the stranger had gone. Elowen found him near the lychgate. She carried a basket of oat cakes for Mistress Pengelly, whose hands ached in damp weather. Her red scarf whipped across her shoulder. "You heard her," Matthew said. "I heard you stop singing." She knew the hymn. Many people know hymns. Elowen set the basket against the wall. Few leave puddles on dry stone. The rain had stopped an hour earlier. Sunlight struck the graves, and water shone in the carved letters. Matthew glanced down. A thin wet trail crossed the path toward the western fields. Elowen followed his glance, then tightened her scarf. "Our mother once told us not to answer a voice from the sea after dark." Matthew gave a short laugh, though his hands stayed cold. Mother told stories to keep children near the fire. She told them because father did not come back from winter fishing. Elowen's face changed as she spoke. She picked up the basket again. "Fear can wear a story's coat. That does not make the danger smaller." Matthew watched the wet trail vanish among the gorse. He remembered their mother waiting at the door, holding a lamp toward black water. He also remembered how her voice had broken when she sang alone. The woman came through 3 more Sundays. Each time, she wore another garment. Blue cloth dark as deep water, gray cloth bright as fish scales, then green silk again. Her sleeves bore tiny patterns that looked like curling weed. She never knelt, never spoke to Father Anselm, and never accepted bread at the parish table. Yet she listened whenever Matthew sang. The village began to whisper. Some said she came from a rich household across the moor. Others said smugglers had brought her ashore. Old Jory the net maker said nothing until the 4th Sunday. He caught Matthew outside the church and placed a rough hand on his shoulder. "My grandfather saw a woman like that near Gernard's head," he said. "She wore pearls and had no shadow at noon." Matthew pulled away. "You expect me to fear a stranger because of an old man's tale. I expect you to notice what stands before your eyes." Jory pointed toward the church wall. "You have a fine voice, lad. Keep it for those who can answer when you call." That evening, Matthew took his small harp to the edge of the village. The tide lay far below the cliffs, leaving black pools among the rocks. He meant to prove that fear had filled everyone's heads. Then a voice rose from the cove. It carried the same hymn he had sung that morning. It carried every note without error, but it had no human warmth. The sound slid over the water, smooth as a seal's back. Matthew stood still. From the path behind him, Elowen called his name. He did not answer until the song stopped. The song below the cliffs. Elowen reached him before the tide turned. The returning water erased the safe path one shining strip at a time. She took his harp by its wooden frame and shut it inside its cloth cover. Her fingers moved quickly, but Matthew saw them tremble. Below them, waves struck the rocks with slow, heavy blows. "You heard it," he said. "I did. It sang my mother's hymn. It copied your mother's hymn." Elowyn faced the sea. "A jackdaw can copy a bell. That does not make it a bell." Matthew wanted to argue. Instead, he looked across the cove. A woman stood on a flat rock near the waterline. The green of her cloak flashed between sheets of spray. She raised one hand. Matthew took a step toward the path. Elowyn blocked him. "Look at the water." The tide had begun to return. Foam ran into the narrow cuts between rocks. A child could have seen the path would disappear within an hour. "She may be trapped," Matthew said. "Then she can climb toward land." The woman did not climb. She waited, with her face turned toward Matthew. A sharp cry sounded from above. Old Jory ran down the hill, one hand on his cap. He carried a coil of rope over his shoulder. "Home," Jory called. "Both of you." Matthew felt shame rise in him. He was no child to be ordered from a cliff. But he also saw Jory's boots slip in the wet grass. The old man had come because he feared for them. That plain act broke something in Matthew's anger. He picked up his harp and followed Elowyn uphill. For 6 days, the stranger did not come to church. Matthew worked beside Elowyn in their small garden. He dug potatoes from dark soil and repaired the broken latch on their gate. His body stayed busy, but the song waited inside him. At night, it returned whenever the wind crossed the chimney. Elowyn never asked what he heard. She set bowls of broth on the table and mended shirts by the fire. Once, Matthew woke and found her sitting near the cold hearth, holding their mother's old scarf. "You cannot sleep?" he asked. She folded the scarf across her knees. "I keep thinking of Father's boat." Matthew sat beside the door, leaving space between them. "I was too young to remember it. I remember Mother walking to the cliff each morning." Elowyn looked toward the shuttered window. She never asked the sea to return him. She asked it to stop taking. The wind pushed smoke down the chimney. Matthew rose and opened the vent. On the 7th morning, church bells called the village together. A child from the western farms had gone missing during the night. His small footprints led toward the cove. Matthew ran before anyone asked him to. He found the boy, Tomas, crouched beneath a ledge above the tide. The child clutched a smooth white shell against his chest. Water had soaked his trousers to the knee. "A lady gave it to me," Tomas said through chattering teeth. "She said her house has rooms made of singing." Matthew lifted him onto his back. The boy's arms locked around his neck. As Matthew climbed, the stranger stood in the shallows below. Her green silk trailed in the water. For the first time, he saw that no wave disturbed her feet. She smiled. Matthew held Tomas tighter and climbed without looking back. A door of water. Tomas returned to his mother, shivering but safe. The villagers wrapped him in blankets beside the church fire. His mother pressed her forehead to his hair and wept without sound. He answered the sea with a song made for people pulling together. Matthew stood near the doorway, salt drying on his sleeves. He had carried the child away. Still, he could not forget the stranger's smile. Father Anselm joined him. The priest held no book that day. He watched the villagers pass bowls of hot milk and bread among themselves. "Some doors open because we want what is behind them," Father Anselm said. Matthew looked toward the cove. "What if someone is calling for help? Then bring others with you," the priest replied. "No good call asks a person to leave every hand that knows his name." That night, Matthew put his harp under the table and covered it with a fishing net. He hoped the rough chords would make it seem ordinary. Near midnight, singing entered the house. No window stood open, no foot crossed the floor. Yet the hymn moved through the dark room, clear and close. It changed at the final line. The voice formed Matthew's name. He sat up. Elowyn stood in the doorway with a lamp. Her face looked pale above the flame. "You hear it too?" he asked. She nodded. Matthew reached for his boots. Elowyn set the lamp down and took his hand. Her grip was firm, the same grip she had used when they crossed flooded fields as children. "If you go, I will not lock you in. But I will walk with you." He looked at her worn sleeve, patched at the elbow. She had spent years keeping their house standing after their mother died. He had let her carry each hard thing alone because singing gave him somewhere else to be. "No," he said. The word hurt him. The song outside rose higher, sweet and sharp. "I will not take you there." Elowyn released his hand. Relief passed across her face, then fear returned. The song had not stopped. Matthew pulled on his boots anyway. He took the fishing net, the lamp, and a small iron bell from the shelf. "I must end this," he said. but I will not go as her guest. They woke Jory and Father Anselm. Before dawn, the four of them walked to the cove. Jory carried his rope, Father Anselm carried a lantern. Elowin carried the bell. At the cliff path, Matthew heard the woman singing below. He did not answer with the hymn. He sang the work song fishermen used when they pulled a heavy boat over stones. Its rhythm had no softness. It called for shoulders, rope, and many hands. Jory joined him. Then Elowin rang the bell in time. The sound rolled down the cliff. The woman appeared beside the water. Her beauty had changed. Her eyes held no welcome now. Wind tore her hood away, and her hair streamed dark and wet around her face. She beckoned once. Matthew kept singing. The carving in the choir stall. The woman stepped backward into the water. The carved figure faced the singers, silent beneath generations of song. For one breath, her green sleeves spread across the waves like weed caught in a current. Then the sea rose around her waist, her shoulders, and her face. The song broke apart beneath the bell's clear strikes. Matthew sang until his throat burned. Jory added his cracked old voice. Father Anselm spoke a prayer in a low, steady tone. Elowin rang the bell until her arm shook. A wave struck the rocks with a sound like a door slamming. The woman vanished. No one moved until daylight touched the fields above Zennor. Then Jory tied his rope around Matthew's waist before they descended. They found no silk on the rocks, no footprints, and no white shells. Only Matthew's harp lay on a shelf of stone where the tide could reach it. The wood had swollen with water. 3 strings had snapped. Matthew carried it home without speaking. Months passed. Winter storms tore branches from the hedges and drove boats into sheltered coves. Matthew did not sing alone after dark. During services, he sang with the parish children and the older voices behind him. His voice changed. It lost none of its strength, but it no longer rose as if it wanted to leave the room. It settled among the other voices, joining them. One spring day, a woodcarver named Madron came to repair the worn bench ends in Zennor church. He asked villagers what shapes belonged in the old wood. A fish, said Tomas, now taller and louder. A saint, said Father Anselm. Elowin looked at Matthew. Carve what waits when someone forgets the shore. Madron studied the church's dark beams. Then he carved a woman with flowing hair, a comb in one hand, and a fish tail curled beneath her. He placed her where choir singers could see her whenever they stood to sing. Matthew watched the chips fall onto the floor. They smelled fresh and sharp, like the inside of a broken branch. When Madron finished, Matthew touched the bench end with one finger. The carving held a calm face. It did not smile. At the next service, rain touched the roof as it had on that first morning. Matthew felt the sea beyond the fields, restless and near. He looked toward Elowin in the front pew. She sat beside Tomas and his mother. Jory stood at the back, leaning on his stick. Matthew began the hymn his mother had loved. This time, every person in the church joined him. Their voices filled the small stone room, rough in places and strong in others. Outside, the tide came in. Inside, no one sang alone.